this. And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that not only this webinar, but all of the questions and answers and the results from the polls will be made available on the website afterwards, so that anyone who hasn't been able to join us at this stage is able to see what has gone on. I'm afraid that there are just too many people involved today to allow everyone to have their microphones switched on. So Zoom automatically defaults to switching microphones off. We would encourage you, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A option. We would strongly encourage you to put your questions in there. Not only that though, you can actually upvote other people's questions and you can also respond to them. So if you've got useful information to share, we'd love for you to be sharing things. You know, you may have links, information about projects. So we're keen to see that Q&A section buzzing with activity. One of the things that we will do, we will go through the presentations, and at the end of each presentation, we will just stop and we'll run a poll or ask some questions. And so that's your opportunity to get some questions into people, find out a little bit more, and then we hope to return to a more general question and answer session at the end. But it'd be really great to see questions popping up in there that the panel can answer. And we'll also be looking into the Q&As and actually identifying questions, and I'll be putting them to the panel so that they can address them verbally to you. I think, so the final thing to point out is that what we'd like to do is invite you to join us at the end for a virtual cup of tea, preferably Yorkshire tea, please. And we did this on Friday, but we had a virtual bar, but we felt that it was a bit irresponsible to be inviting people to a virtual bar on a work day on a Tuesday. So virtual cup of tea. That's going to be taking place in GoToMeeting. We've sent out details that will have come with the registration details for this. It's worth noting that everyone's cameras and microphones will be switched on and it won't be recorded. So it's your opportunity to bring any questions that you'd like to discuss more informally, and it's an opportunity to meet the iCASP team and do what we would be doing, I suppose, in the coffee breaks if we were actually meeting at a face-to-face Confluence. I think that's everything from me. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is ask all the panel apart from Joe to switch off their cameras, and I'm going to hand over to Joe to just introduce iCASP and just let you know a bit more about what's been going on in the last year.
Thanks, Poppy. Well, welcome everybody. So this is our annual Confluence, but of course it's a different format today, but I hope you will, as Poppy said, take advantage of the interactive nature of the webinar. So do please fire in questions and other points into the chat function, and we'll do our best to follow up. Because after all, what iCASP is an impact program which relies on you all contributing and telling us what your needs are and telling us how we can support you and your organizations, and we wouldn't function otherwise. So what I'm going to do now is just share my screen and just show a few slides just by way of introduction. For some of you who may not be aware of how iCASP operates, but then I'll also mention a few slides about what we're thinking about in terms of future operation. So let me just open the slides. Hopefully you can see those now. I'm sure Poppy will interrupt if you can't. Okay, so we're about at the midpoint of iCASP. So we were funded in 2017 by Natural Environment Research Council, and the whole premise is to try to use environmental science that exists already at universities of York, Sheffield and Leeds, and also the National Centre for Atmospheric Science. So using that science base to help generate 50 million of economic benefits to the Yorkshire region, to grow the network of engaged catchment solutions experts across the region and make sure that people are talking to each other, communicating with each other effectively, understanding where everyone's coming from. We want to inform policies and strategies and also produce materials, and that might be some sort of user-friendly tool, it might be a guide, it might be just documentation that supports policy, for example, but materials anyway that assist on the ground solutions. So while our focus is Yorkshire, where possible, we're also thinking forward, looking to upscale any of the work we've done to national or international levels. So it might be that we've developed something for the region, but actually we think it could have broader benefits. So we're also looking strategically at how we might deliver a broader impact from the work in the region. Now, iCASP operates with six themes which are integrated. So these are around carbon sequestration, climate resilience, drought and flood risk mitigation, flood forecasting, sustainable agriculture, and water quality. But the important part here is the I of iCASP. It's integrated. So we're looking at, solutions that could deliver outputs related to more than one of these. We're trying to integrate organizations so people work together to deliver those environmental solutions. And we're also trying to integrate the funding. So can we bring together funding from multiple organizations to deliver more effective and more efficient solutions within the region? So we have about 30 projects that are either completed or currently operating. And those have delivered a whole suite of, impacts all in their own way. And we haven't got time to go through all of the detail of all of those. But just to say that amongst those, there's 16 new tools or guidance documents or models that have been developed. 40 partners are directly engaged in individual projects, but about 160 organizations have been attending our events. We've supported 16 business cases with investment plans to a value of almost £200 million for the region. We've also secured about £7 million in additional funding embedded into the iCASP way of working. And then importantly, I mentioned how we're trying to improve the networking across the region with practitioners and experts on catchment management. And so we've actually set up 2 communities of practice, and we're going to hear about some of those today. And of course, in terms of the detail here, there are examples of specific impacts. For example, where we've supported Leeds City Council in agreeing with developers and putting into policy a much more rigorous design standard for new developments for the average amount of water per person that's used by that particular dwelling. And we did that through looking at climate data, looking at water resource plans, looking at population change, and also looking at the cost of such implementation, which actually turned out to be £9 per dwelling. So to reach a much higher standard in terms of amount of litres per day per person. So there are things like that we've done through short, quick turnaround projects. So you can download from our webpage an enormous amount of resources, and it's growing all of the time. It includes the report I've just mentioned about the water supplied per household, but it includes reports, for example, on surface water flood forecasting, some of our responses to Westminster consultations, for example, and also includes some presentations, so on non-native species, living with water partnership and Hull, natural flood management projects, and a peatland restoration project update, for example. So some of the resources are on there with videos you can download, or documents, tools, and things like that. So I encourage you to do that. So just to note that we've got quite a bit of feedback from our partners across the region, and you're always welcome to provide feedback at any time. It's very important to us. I know this is quite a text-busy slide, but it just brings some quotes from some of the people we've worked with over the past 3 years, and it just illustrates that people do feel that we're supporting you and doing your day-to-day jobs. We're helping to strengthen bids. We're helping to produce models and tools that help capital investment, for example, and we're also allowing ideas to flourish, and that's really nice to hear. So these things are important. So we do encourage you to feedback to us at any time about how we're supporting you and your organisations. So we're still operating. We still have funding to allocate to new projects. So these need to be within the catchment-based subject remit of iCASP. And as I said, it does need to be underpinned by the science at the partner universities. Any new project has to articulate what difference will this make? What impact will this enable? And it should, of course, be focused in the Yorkshire region, but where possible, we can look for potential broader impacts. All projects have to be co-designed between non-academic and academic teams, just to ensure that we can bring together these two critical components. Projects can be all sorts of scales. It could be a few £1,000s to much larger than £100,000. And I mentioned one of those short-term, low-cost projects earlier. And projects can be funded directly by iCASP, or there can be some co-funding with other organisations that might be in kind or cash contributions. And but where a project might cost more than £20,000, that to iCASP, then it's our governance group who make the decision about what projects are funded. And those are made up, the governance group is made up of 16 non-academic partner organisations. So it's about, you know, is this going to be a useful project? Will this deliver impact? So that's really important. So we've got a whole suite of live projects right now, and some of the ones on screen at the minute were discussed at the first iCASP webinar last week. And you can, of course, look back at the recording of that webinar at any time. And so I encourage you to do that if you're interested in any of these projects. And we've also got a suite of projects, some of which are a bit more relevant to today's topic around soils and sustainable agriculture and so on. And we're going to hear about some of these today. But of course, you can click on the website and just click on any of these project topics and more, and get a bit more information. And if there's not enough there for you, you can always contact us to grab more information. And finally, just to say that we're thinking about the broader, longer-term sustainability of iCASP and how do we build upon the network and the fantastic partnerships that we've got across the region now. And so there's a suite of large funding opportunities that we're exploring, all of which are broadly looking at water systems, catchment systems, and how we can develop economic growth through research and innovation and impact in the region. And in particular, all three of these examples are looking at elements of how we deliver kind of green growth post C19. So how do we decouple growth from environmental degradation? You know, we want kind of good growth, green growth moving forward. So how do we deliver those, and how do we get that? How does that enable us to become the heart of one of the key regions globally for the water economy? So that's what all of these kind of bids, example bids I've just put on screen are looking to do. So I'll end there by expressing my thanks to the whole of the iCASP team for all of the enormous amounts of work that's put into delivering the project and delivering impacts. I also want to thank everybody for their contributions to iCASP, all of the partners, because as I said, it's a partner program, and it's really crucial that you engage and that you tell us what your needs are and what solutions you're looking for, so that we can all work together to deliver those solutions. So I extend my thanks to you all for everything you've done over the past 3 years. And looking forward over the next 3 years, we're very keen for your further engagement and for your further input. And so I hope you do enjoy the webinar format of the Confluence today, and that you do engage. But of course, feel free to contact us at any time with follow-ons from any ideas you've got and so on. You're always welcome to contribute to those and to the program. So I'll end it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. So popping up on your screens now is the first of 2 polls that we're going to do before we go to our next presentation. So we're just trying to find out a little bit of information from you, the participants, as we go through this. So we've got a range of different polls lined up. Some of these are going to be relevant to you, some are not. We're also aware that for some of you, there may be some issues with viewing the polls. And so that's, let us know in the chat if for some reason you are unable to see these polls. Okay, I can see that Kirsty, excuse me, Kirsty is unable to see the polls. So Kirsty, what we're going to try and do is put the wording for the polls up in the chat so that you can see what is being asked. But the first question, oh, here they go, they're up there already. Okay, so for the sake of people who aren't able to see the poll, I'm just going to summarise the poll results. So this is the question about, is your organisation considering a green recovery post-COVID? 52% of responses say yes, 41% have said yes, and we would welcome the opportunity to talk with iCASP about this, and 7% have said no. So I think what we'll do is we'll move on from the polls now, and I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who is our workstream lead for sustainable agriculture, and he's going to talk to you and just give you an overview of basically the whole of this webinar. So Jonathan, if I can invite you to switch on your camera and to start sharing your screen when you're ready.
Hello, and welcome. Just let me get myself set up. Whoops. That's it. So thank you all for joining us today. It's a great pleasure and privilege to run the start of this session, Where Next for Yorkshire Soils. It's a huge topic, and it struck me right from the start that perhaps we needed to have a quick overview of what Yorkshire soils are like and their significance both in the region and nationally. And I think the thing that strikes me first of all when you look at Yorkshire soils, and if you look at the blue box on the left-hand panel here, which shows you the Yorkshire Humber region approximately within that blue box, what you can see is that the diversity in terms of quantities of carbon stored within soils within this region is really very large indeed. So from some of the highest values in carbon storage, of course these are in peatlands, right down to some of the lowest values that we find in some of our most intensively cultivated mineral soils. And so within Yorkshire, when we talk about Yorkshire soils, we're actually talking about a very wide range of different types of soils. And that's reflected also then in the way that those soils are used and the value systems that we apply to those soils. So if you look at the right-hand panel, the agricultural land classification scheme, which grades land with respect to its agricultural production values, for Yorkshire, we see that the range ranges from the very highest values, the grade 1 land, right through to the very lowest values, the grade 5 land. And you'll see straight away that there's a relationship with topography, obviously, and the upland areas are the areas which tend to have the lowest agricultural values, but that doesn't mean to say that they've got lowest overall values in terms of other things, because many of these upland regions are hugely important in terms of carbon storage, as you can see, in terms of their national contributions to organic matter storage in these peatlands. But they're also tremendously important in terms of intercepting water, storing water, filtering water. And then the lowlands receive some of this water, and of course on occasion they receive too much water into the lowlands, and we have these problems of flooding in the lowlands. But the other thing to emphasize is that high organic matter content in the soil is actually quite good for agriculture, and in fact the very highest value agricultural soils are these lowland peatlands around the Humber estuary, for example. And they in themselves raise a number of other issues in terms of the sustainability of cultivation on peatlands, the fact that these peatlands are oxidizing and ultimately will be uncultivable in future years as they gradually run out, as it were. And they are major sources of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So whereas some of the upland peatlands are storing more carbon and accumulating carbon, also there are major areas of the uplands which are actually being degraded or are degrading as a result of a combination of drying out and climate change and management changes. So within Yorkshire, we've got a big diversity of soils. There's a lot of agriculture and a big diversity of land uses linked through to that. And then, of course, the other component within this landscape are all the red regions, the urban regions that sit in this. And the soils are important in terms of how they function, both in terms of natural flood management and protecting urban areas from flooding, but also in supplying water that comes ultimately through the soils into the regions, and then also controlling things like nutrient flows as well. And when we look in at the importance of Yorkshire soils in a national context, what we see is that Yorkshire is very, very important in its contribution to food security and food production. About 15% of the crops and about 13% of the livestock raised in England come from Yorkshire, and yet Yorkshire is actually only 12% of the area of England. So Yorkshire punches above its weight in terms of its contribution to agriculture and food production. And again, because of this big topographical diversity and big rainfall gradients within the region as well, we have tremendous importance of water storage and flood risk management. And a lot of that does relate back to soil management and ecosystem management related to that have impacts on soil qualities and functions. And the water quality itself, over the region, of course, water quality as a general pattern has hugely improved in recent years, and measures to reduce pollution and so on have been increasingly effective. And yet there's still, quite substantial problems of nutrient and pesticide flows. And within the arable systems, for example, our major crops grown in this country still operate at typically less than 50% of the nitrogen fertilizer that's added to a crop is actually taken up into the crop. So the rest of it typically goes into the environment. So there's a set of issues still that we haven't, as it were, fully bottomed out and resolved or managed effectively yet. Although, as I say, the management's an awful lot better than it used to be and is going in the right direction. And then there are these other issues, like things like carbon storage. There's a lot of carbon in these uplands, but a lot of that carbon is potentially vulnerable to climate change. And we also don't have enough carbon in a lot of the lowland soils. So there's need to think about ways of trying to improve carbon storage and the way we manage carbon within the landscape. And at the same time, recognizing that, there are some increasing challenges as the climate warms up and as we have more extreme weather events. This also potentially causes erosion, and the erosion will tend to remove topsoil, which is the bit which has got the most organic matter in, for example. And then the other part to our Yorkshire soils is that their contribution to the landscape and to biodiversity. And of course, within Yorkshire we have 3 national parks, 2 entirely within the region. And these are really important, more than millions of visitors a year to these areas, making use of the natural resources and the attractive landscapes. But those landscapes are underpinned by soil, and often perhaps we haven't historically given enough attention to the soil importance within maintaining and supporting both biodiversity and landscape properties. And then thinking particularly about this webinar session, where next? What are the issues for the future? Well, we've kind of already touched on some of these. There are these big issues in terms of climate change, the increasing, and this year, for example, the scale of some of the floods that we saw around the River Aire, for example, really quite dramatic and devastating for many people. So big issues in terms of water management, droughts as well. We've had long dry periods earlier in this year, and that have quite profound implications for food production and cropping and so on, and also livestock management. And then, connected into this also these issues about fires, particularly uncontrolled wildfires in the uplands, burning away potentially peatlands that have accumulated over hundreds, typically many thousands of years, and losing those carbon stores, but then also leaving behind really badly degraded environments. So there are some big threats and challenges here. There are also opportunities and political landscape changes. We've seen the agricultural land use policy changes coming out of government, with the shift away from subsidizing land simply on the basis of its area towards targeting public money for public goods, and looking particularly at trying to enhance the properties and functions of the environment to the common good, as it were. And that changes the way in which we think about the value of soils within that system. Then we suddenly recognize that soil actually makes a contribution towards public goods, which perhaps hasn't been adequately recognized in the past, and then potentially reward, and should be rewarding, farmers and land managers for doing things that are to public benefit in relation to that. And then also government aspirations and commitments in terms of net zero emissions, the policy goals in relation to that, where we're looking at trying to increase the amount of carbon that's stored in the soils as one of those actions, but also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce methane emissions, nitrous oxide emissions. And again, these are emissions that are coming, a lot of them, out of land and land management, and also livestock in the case of the methane. And then there are other things like the national tree planting targets. I think most of our political parties at the last election were sort of vying with one another to outdo them, outbid, as it were, the numbers of trees they were going to promise to put into the landscape. Well, current government aspirations, if you apportioned the amount of tree area that's been planned for the whole of England, apportion it out according to the proportion of the land area in Yorkshire and Humberside, we'd be looking at putting nearly 1,000 square kilometres of new forests into Yorkshire and Humberside over the coming decades. And that raises quite profound questions about where those trees should be planted, what kinds of trees, but also what kind of soils should they be put on. And if we put these trees into some of the upland areas with peatlands, we'd end up drying out the peat and potentially making the problem worse in terms of carbon storage. But if we put some of these trees into some of our prime agricultural land, then there's also implications for food production and food security. So there's a set of challenges in terms of how can we most effectively use these opportunities and make and fit these trees into the landscape. And there are things like natural flood management schemes and other things where actually there may be double benefits where you put these trees. They may actually function more than just carbon stores, but may actually have additional add-on values to the landscape, to people, and also to the soils in terms of binding soils and retaining soils and reducing erosion risks and so on. And as I say, I think I think we are at an exciting time. I mean, the previous government in the 25-year environment plan has laid out a pathway to try and improve the environment, and soil health is actually now a new farming policy goal. And the government said very plainly that its aspiration was for all soil management in England by 2030 to be sustainable management, so sustainable management of our soils by then. But at the same time, they also pointed out in this report that they currently lack sufficient data to know just how badly our soil's been affected by this, and they claim this plan aims to correct that. I mean, I think the reality is there's still a big disconnect between the aspirations of some of these government statements and actually delivery. And I think it's interesting, I'm one of the scientific advisory committee on the charity Sustainable Soils Alliance, which is a lobby group which is involved in trying to improve the sustainability of soils within the UK, and particularly draw attention to policymakers the need to do more to protect these soils. They made a freedom of information request at the end of last year, to which they got a reply early this year, asking about how much money is being spent nationally on monitoring soils in England and compared to other major assets. And so they asked about water quality and air quality. And what you see is these, you know, it's quite disappointing really that, you know, it's great that water quality is given a good priority, as in air quality, and you know, over £60 million on water quality, nearly £8 million on air quality, but a totally paltry amount of money being spent on monitoring soil quality. There is no national monitoring of soil quality. There is no national framework for monitoring soil quality. We haven't done so for decades. And you know, some of the major reasons why in the 25-year environment plan, they say we currently lack sufficient data to know just how badly our soil has been affected, is because there's been no national strategy to actually value soils and really monitor what's going on. And although their plan notionally aimed to correct it, actually at the moment we don't have clear mechanisms or commitment from the government financially to really address this issue very effectively. And I balance that against the fact that if you look at the bottom of this slide, the economic costs of soil degradation in England and Wales to the UK economy has been estimated by Graves et al. In 2015 to be about £1.2 billion a year. So not investing in solving these problems represents, you know, a very poor lack of direction of money, really. And if you look at what the causation of this value loss, soil degradation, nearly half of it, 47%, is due to loss of organic matter. So if we get that right, we get double wins. We not only get improved soil quality, but we also get carbon out of the air, out of the atmosphere, into soil where it's good for us rather than bad for us. 40% is due to soil compaction, and then about 12% due to soil erosion. Although actually, if you dig a bit deeper in the paper, they acknowledge themselves that the estimates for erosion are very much sort of back of the envelope calculations because of the lack of national soil erosion monitoring data. So it's based on making a series of inferences from case studies and so on. So even with these figures, there may well be underestimates of the true impacts economically. But I want to move to a more positive note, and I think that the government has, in the drafts for the environmental land management scheme, which is the new policy that would take over from our current farm subsidy payment system to pay public money for public goods. Within this scheme, there really is now being embedded recognition that good soil management is important for public goods and services, for clean water, for reducing risks of flooding, for biodiversity, for carbon storage, etc. There's a recognition that actually there is a need to value these things that in the past we've taken for granted and assumed that farmers would just provide free to society. And you can see within this, there's a 3-tier funding system. So the lowest tier, which will be the one that hopefully the majority of farmers and land managers will gain access to, and the higher tiers are more specialized and larger scale projects. But these sorts of tier 1 funding proposals, a lot of them now do link very much into managing the soil environment and soil related functions and qualities. And all the ones I've put the blue arrows by, you can see like nutrient management, limiting livestock grazing to avoid compaction and runoff, direct soil management, such as avoiding cultivating and trafficking wet soils, increasing soil organic matter content, maintaining water levels in peat soils, contour ploughing, minimal or no tillage cultivations. There's a whole set of things here potentially where many people can engage and help to improve their soil qualities. Again, the way in which field margins are managed and planted up, and the way in which particularly the use of buffer strips and zones which can contribute importantly to natural flood management and also to retaining soil sediment, nutrients and pollutants, and process those within those areas. And then also maintaining cover of the soil so it's not washed or blown away, using cover crops, using more diverse rotations, companion cropping, the use of lays, and we within the consortium have been studying a lot the effects of lays, working collaboratively with University of Leeds and York colleagues. And then also issues relating to water storage and efficient water use, which again relates back to the capacity of soils to infiltrate water, their storage capacities, which are often and largely increased by things like organic matter content and larger earthworm populations and things like that. Now, what's important about all of these tier 1 funding components is that many of these things are things actually we're going to be discussing a bit more detail today. So when we look at the next stage of this webinar, the issues about the public goods and the soil health are going to be picked up in Pippa Chapman's talk and presentation. Payment for outcomes, and particularly the soil and natural flood management. Elizabeth Sutherland's going to further develop this. And then also learning about agri-environment schemes. Manolis will be taking forward some of the work that he's been doing on this to explain its relevance here as well. And then integrated nitrogen management, supporting the policies in that area, Kevin's presentation. So I think, all these things that we're going to be talking about really relate back into a structure now where we see a way forward perhaps to greater value and use sustainably manage soils within Yorkshire and within the UK. But particularly within the Yorkshire region, getting soil management right is really important for all of us, because when we get it wrong, we can end up with our houses flooded, or we can end up with farmers suffering in terms of poor productivity and poor cropping system. So it's in all our benefits to get soil management right. And I think it's fantastic that we're in an age now where, although there are some big problems here, there are also solutions. And working collaborative and working together, I think there's real opportunities to take a big landscape scale and catchment scale approach to understanding and managing soils, rather than just taking a very piecemeal approach that tends to happen in the past. So I'm going to stop there. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. So I can see that several questions about soil health have started dropping into the Q&As. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go straight to Pippa's talk now, and hopefully some more questions will come in. And then at the end of that, we're going to do a poll, and then I will ask Jonathan and Pippa to answer some of these soil health questions. So we're going to go over to Pippa's talk now.
Good morning, my name is Pippa Chapman. I'm a professor in the School of Geography at the University of Leeds, and today I'm going to talk to you about soil health and the delivery of public goods. We know that maintaining and improving soil health is essential for the future sustainability of agriculture and the delivery of environmental public goods, such as managing flood risk and improving water quality. However, despite the numerous studies indicating that intensive agricultural practices have led to a decline in soil organic matter and an increase in compaction and soil erosion, it is not always clear which management practices or land management interventions are most likely to lead to an improvement in soil health, and how this links to the delivery of multiple public goods. So in 2018, iCASP undertook a project that reviewed the available evidence on how commonly promoted agri-environment options improve soil health to support the development of future land use policies in Yorkshire and the UK. The project carried out a systematic review of the evidence base in the academic literature concerning the impact of 10 land management activities on 8 soil health indicators. The agricultural activities can be divided into 3 different sets: those related to land use change, linear features in the landscape, such as hedges and buffer strips, and activities related to arable farming. We chose soil indicators that relate to the soil functions of carbon cycling and storage, water movement, storage and availability, and retention and transport of solutes, as these functions link directly to the delivery of climate change mitigation, flood mitigation, and improved water quality. As you can see, we found over 8,000 papers, but of these, only 240 contained information concerning whether the impact of the agricultural activity led to an improvement, no significant change, or a decline in the soil health indicator. The full report from this study can be found on the iCASP webpage, but a summary of the key results are presented here in the table of land management intervention versus soil health indicator. The effect of the intervention on each soil health indicator was reported as either an increase, a decrease, or no change, and the most frequently recorded effect was considered to represent the overall effect. And I should state that only published papers with experimental control versus treatment were included in the review. What is obvious is that most agricultural practices have a positive impact on soil health indicators, as highlighted by green in the table, while orange representing no change and red representing an overall negative effect on soil health indicators. The number in brackets represents the number of studies that we found. And what you can notice from the numbers is that the available database on soil health is limited. There were over 3 times more studies that reported on the impact of tillage on soil indicators than any other of the interventions, which all had less than 30 studies. There was no suitable soil health impact studies were found for beetle banks. The most commonly reported soil health indicators were for soil organic carbon and bulk density. About half of the studies reported the impact on aggregate stability, and about a third of the studies reported the impact of the intervention on number of earthworms and hydrological properties. Of the interventions that were considered in this study, we found that conservation tillage, addition of organic amendments, and inclusion of grass clover layers in arable rotations all led to an increase in soil carbon, earthworms, infiltration rates, and improvement in soil structure. Therefore, we can say with some confidence that these agricultural practices are likely to lead to the delivery of climate change and flood mitigation. However, there was not enough data on the impacts of linear features on soil health. While this study reviewed the impact of individual interventions on soil health indicators, what is apparent is that there are some key ways in which soil health can be improved, and they include ensuring the soil is not left bare, particularly in the autumn and winter periods, minimising soil disturbance through, for example, minimal tillage or no tillage, increasing soil organic matter by increasing organic amendments or reducing removal of crop residues, increasing green manures, or introducing livestock into arable rotations, avoiding compaction, and this could be related to livestock numbers and vehicles, and particularly going onto the land during wet periods, and reducing pesticide use, which is known to have an impact on the soil biology. And what you can see from the photo is that actually here we introduced grass clover layers into arable rotation, and you can see the soil structure has changed notably. But by doing this, we've basically ensured the soil was not left bare in the autumn. We've minimised soil disturbance because the grass layer has been in place for 3 years. We've increased soil organic matter by ensuring the grass is left there all year round and not removed through hay or silage cutting or by livestock. We've avoided compaction because the land hasn't been, vehicles haven't passed over the land so much, and we've also reduced pesticide use. While the studies that we reviewed generally monitored the soil health indicators within a laboratory environment, there are a number of ways you can assess soil health in the field, and I've listed 4 ways in which you can do this: through the evaluation of soil structure, carrying out a slate test where you look at the ease at which soil aggregates disperse in water, counting the number of earthworms present in a certain volume of soil, and looking at the time it takes for a known volume of water to infiltrate into the soil. The review also highlighted a number of gaps in knowledge, and this includes: what are the optimal species combination to use for enhancing soil health when planting hedges and woodlands or using cover crops and grass lays? There's very little information on this within the literature. There was a lack of data on how soil health indicators and the soil functions respond to changes in land management at soil depths greater than 30 centimetres. This maybe has implications for the delivery of climate change mitigation, because by not looking at how soil organic carbon changes in the soil, whole soil profile, we might be underestimating or overestimating its climate change mitigation. And it's important to note that the majority of agricultural interventions are carried out at the field scale, yet the delivery of public goods are often monitored at a much larger scale, for instance at the catchment or landscape scale. But in conclusion, the report identified which land management activities can lead to an improvement in some key soil health indicators and the delivery of public goods. In this study, we focused on a set of soil health indicators, but it is not exhaustive and has not included biodiversity and soil microbiology, which are complex to interpret but are important. We need to be realistic about timeframes. Many soil health indicators take time to respond to changes in land management, and most of the studies that we looked at only considered short timeframes between 3 and 5 years. There were very few studies that considered studies that were of greater than 20 years in length. The gaps in evidence can provide a focus for current future research, including DEFRA-funded tests and trials, use of transition period funding, and UKRI programmes of research. It is critical, however, that this current future research is done in collaboration with stakeholders to enable immediate use in informing the new environmental land management system, longer-term land use policies, and ensuring the future sustainability of agriculture. Thanks for listening, and I'd also like to acknowledge a wide number of academics across the universities of Sheffield, Leeds and York who helped in the preparation of this report, and the steering group involved in designing the review. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you from Pippa for that. We've got several questions coming into the Q&A now, but what we're going to first of all do, just to give Jonathan and Pippa an opportunity to look at those, is actually run through the poll that we've got related to this section of the webinar.
Hello, so you should have seen a poll pop up on the screen now, and there's several questions in this one. There's 6 in total. The first one is your organisation promoting practices that aim to increase soil health? And this is a simple yes and no answer. The next question is related to question 1. So if you answered yes to question 1, please can you answer this question? It's related to what landscapes you operate in. Question 3 is asking if your land is arable or improved grassland, what tillage practices are you using or promoting? And you can skip this question if it's not relevant. Sorry, just scrolling down. Question 4 is if your land is mainly arable, are you using or promoting cover crops and or lays in arable rotations? And again, you can skip this question if it's not relevant. Question 5 is, do you undertake any soil testing or monitoring of soil quality? And that's a yes or no question. And then question 6 is related to question 5. So what is the main reason you carry out soil testing? And there's several answers that you can provide. If you can't see the poll, we've popped it in the Q&A section of Zoom, which is at the bottom of your screen, so you should be able to answer there.
Okay, so we've not got many responses on this, and we expected that, but I'm just very briefly going to summarise what the answers were. So in response to, is your organisation promoting practices that aim to increase soil health, 100% of responses say yes, so that's really good to hear. And following on from that, all of those who answered yes have been asked to indicate which landscapes they're operating in, and because you can actually select numerous answers in this, and because Zoom does strange things with how it adds up, arable has come out as the landscape which most people are operating in, followed by lowland grazing and improved and semi-improved upland pasture, with less than, well, 50% of people indicating moorland grazing. The next question is, if your land is mainly arable or improved grassland, what tillage practices are you using or promoting? And the one that's come out on top there is minimal tillage, with conventional tillage just following behind that. 100% of people have indicated cover crops when asked, if your land is mainly arable, are you using or promoting cover crops and or lays in arable rotations? And then when asked about undertaking any soil testing or monitoring of soil quality, 75% of people have said yes. And then our final one in this, so for anyone who answered yes, they were doing soil testing, have been asked what the main reasons for carrying that out are. And there's a really nice even spread across guiding fertiliser application rates, managing soil structure, monitoring soil health, and monitoring changes in soil organic carbon content. So thank you for filling that in. What I'm going to do now is ask, hang on, I need to just get rid of that from my screen. Jonathan and Pippa, can you turn your cameras back on so people can see you? And we're going to go to the Q&As now that have been coming in through both of your talks. And I think I've written down that we've got 5 different questions, but I just wondered if either of you had anything that you particularly wanted to answer in those question lists that you've got a burning desire to address before we sort of run through them.
Do you want me to start, Pippa?
Yeah, that's fine, Jonathan. You were looking at the national scale.
Just, I mean, a couple of things. Thanks for those of you asking questions about national scale monitoring. Yeah, we've not really had any rigorous national scale monitoring since the last countryside survey, which the countryside survey was originally designed as a survey of the countryside. Soil analysis was introduced into it in the more recent surveys, and as an initiative that Bridget Emmett pushed hard on, which was good. But the reality was that right from the start, the sampling intensity, the numbers of samples from that countryside survey is very, very small for soils compared to monitoring of other components, which you don't need as many samples. So although it's a stratified, randomized sample across the country, the reality has always been that it hasn't provided detailed data that we need on soil management practices, and it hasn't really provided very high resolution data on long-term changes in soil properties because the sample numbers are very low. How is this done in other countries? Well, I mean, the classic example is places like in Sweden, where they have a national monitoring program, over 10,000 sites that are revisited every 10 years. And they've been doing this for multiple decades. So we frequently get told by the government it's too expensive, but there are many other countries that have actually put the money into doing this. The other issue, and one of you's already raised this, is that many farmers are already doing soil analyses and having samples analysed. Not enough are, and in fact it's amazing, most of our grassland farmers, for example, will apply fertiliser without having taken any soil samples at all, done any prior analyses, interestingly. So the main sampling is going on the arable land, and the arable land is being used obviously to inform fertiliser management and so on, but only a very small proportion of farmers are measuring some of the things that are really important from the point of view of soil health, delivering public goods and services. So not very many samples have been taken for organic matter, and there are very few samples that have been taken to measure things like infiltration rates or bulk densities. Now, these are things that they're not hugely expensive, but they are a bit costly, and we need a national program in which farmers' data gets gathered and collected and goes into a national database. But of course, the issues related to that relate back to confidentialities and all these other things that are still yet to be properly resolved. But as I say, people are already paying for some of these analyses, but the data just isn't being collected nationally. That's one of the big issues.
Thanks, Jonathan. Pippa?
Yeah, and I just sort of add to what Jonathan said, that last survey, the countryside survey, was carried out in 2007, so over 10 years ago. And I think what Jonathan highlighted in his introductory talk was that, you know, again, and people have commented about this, that soil sampling is expensive, but we are spending over £6 million on water quality analysis and not even £500,000 on soil quality. So it depends where your priority is, I suppose. There were some other questions about where do I find data on soil quality for a specific area. Well, this is challenging because obviously, as I said in my presentation, soil quality isn't really determined by one soil property. So there are maps of soil types and you can get some information on soil properties, but it's variable. And as Jonathan said, we don't have any maps across the country on soil quality. They just don't exist. So in reality, it's sort of a bit of a new concept. The data doesn't exist, and it's difficult to interpret. So it's not possible to just go on the computer and find soil quality for a specific area, I'm afraid.
I think the other thing to say is that there are lots of opportunities for farmers and land managers increasingly to get hands-on experience of quick evaluations of soil properties and qualities. Yeah. And there have been a number of programs with quite a lot of money spent on helping develop tools to help do evaluations of soil health. And in particular, if you look at the NIAB website, and AHDB websites, the Great Soils project, for example, that Elizabeth Stockdale has been leading, they've developed tools that help farmers with this. And there's also scorecards now for soil structure, for example, with visuals assessment of soil structure, which can be really helpful for farmers seeing where there are problems with the soil and also where their interventions are improving the soil, because often the structure is one of the first things that starts to improve when soil management is better.
Yeah, so as I highlighted, there are some things you can measure in the field, like Jonathan said, the VES soil structure. You can look at a slate test, look at how easy or friable or easy your soil aggregates disintegrate in water. You can look at earthworm counts, and you can measure the time water takes to infiltrate into the water. These are some simple things. You can also look at soil colour. Somebody asked some questions about regenerative agriculture. this is going on. It's definitely in both arable and livestock. It's different things in those systems, but farmers are engaging with this. There's groups of farmers looking at this, and they are sharing it with other farmers. So I think we will be hearing a lot more about regenerative agriculture. What I should say as well, that there is a lack of data in some areas, for instance, mob grazing, which is used in livestock farming. There are studies looking at the impact of that on soil health. But again, soils vary in their characteristics in different areas. So what might work in one area might not be so good in another area, and that's some of the issues related to soil health. I don't know if there's any other questions, Jonathan, that we haven't touched upon.
Well, unfortunately, we're running behind time a little bit. So what I'm going to do is ask you if there are any other questions that are that are popping up, either in the opened or the answered section of questions. If you could, if you've got anything to add to those. Very frustratingly, a couple of people are having real problems actually responding. It's clearly not a problem for everyone, because I can see that some people who've been attending have been able to respond to some people's questions. So Zoom is penalising some people for some reason. We're not entirely sure why, but it'd be good if you, Jonathan and Pippa, if you have got any other answers to questions that haven't been answered, if you can pop them into there. But I think we're going to have to move on so that we don't run out of time. So can I ask you both to turn off your cameras? And we're going to then just move on to Elizabeth Sullivan's talk about the Payment for Outcomes trial that the National Trust are carrying out. And just bear with me, I will.
Hi everyone, my name's Elizabeth Sullivan and I work on the National Trust's Payment for Outcomes trial in the Yorkshire Dales. The Payment for Outcomes trial is funded by the National Trust, and it's looking at outcomes or results-based approaches to agri-environment payments. This is an alternative to the current way of paying agri-environment payments, which is usually based on management prescriptions. We've got 5 farms participating in the trial. 3 of them started in 2018 and a further 2 joined in 2019. The focus in this trial is on soil health, which I'll talk about in a moment, and we're also looking at pollinators. As well as the National Trust trial, we're also working with iCASP on a project on outcomes-based approaches to natural flood management, and that project is running in parallel with the National Trust trial. We're looking at soil health for several reasons. Firstly, soil isn't really covered in any other outcomes-based trials and pilot projects that are going on across the UK and Europe. Soil's clearly key to agricultural production, but it's also important in terms of lots of other ecosystem services. Soil's got a specific mention in the Agriculture Bill and in the 25-year Environment Plan, and there is now an indicator to monitor soils being developed as part of the monitoring for the 25-year plan. Soil health and flooding, there are obviously some important connections here. Some people would say that soil health is key to any approach to natural flood management. It's the foundation of a natural flood management approach. A well-structured soil plays a key role in flood attenuation. It's important for water storage. Soil's an important carbon store if it's in a good condition, so that's important for climate change mitigation. Damaged soils cost lots to the economy in terms of flood events. And then where you've also got soil erosion, you've got problems with sediments, which can increase the difficulties of flooding with properties and roads and so on. In this trial, we assess soil health in several ways. So we do an annual visual sward assessment. That's done by the farmer with help from the advisor, so usually me. We also look at the structural properties of the soil. and that's done in year 1 and year 5 of the trial. So this is a 5-year trial, and we do that in year 1 and year 5 to give the soil a bit of time to change if there are land management alterations. We do chemical testing so we can find out about pH and soil nutrients, and we follow up our visual and structural testing with soil compaction testing. If you just take note of the picture in this slide, you can see a cattle feeder there with a little bit of damage around it, and that's something I'm going to refer to in the next slide. So this is a simplified version of our visual assessment form. This is done once a year in the spring on each of the fields that have been entered into the trial. Down the left-hand side you can see there is a list of features. So the farmer would walk round, do a walkover of each field and check out each of these features and award them a good score, moderate or poor. At the bottom there you can see I've highlighted supplementary feeding sites. So we saw that picture in the previous slide. To get a good score, any feeding sites would need to be rotated regularly and there to be no evidence of damage from winter or spring feeding. If for a moderate score, you're looking at, again, these feeders should be rotated regularly with just limited poaching damage seen in the spring. And that's really what we would think about this picture that we saw in the previous slide. There is some damage, but we'd expect that to recover. If you've got a large ring feeder that's not been moved around, there's lots of really serious poaching damage, then you'd be looking at a poor score for that one. So that was the visual assessment. This is, again, a simplified version of our structural assessment for the soils. We would normally have the opportunity for 3 scores, so you see the scoring down the right hand side. We've got here a 5 and a -1. There is also a set of descriptions for a moderate score as well, which will get a 3. I've just included the good and poor scores to save space. So again, I've picked one out here. So we look at the aggregates in the soil, and if they crumble readily between the fingers, then that would be a 5, so that's suggesting the soil is in good condition. If the aggregates are really compact, large, difficult to pull apart, that's suggesting there is evidence of soil compaction, and that would get a poor score. And we would follow that structural assessment up with soil compaction surveys. And you can see the results here from one of our farms. The soil compaction surveys are done with penetrometer at 3 different depths, and this is the result for the 20 centimetre depth. Green dots, and these are on a 50 metre grid by the way, so green dots indicate very limited soil compaction, so that would be a good result. Orange dots indicate some moderate compaction, and then red dots would indicate severe compaction. So there are no red dots on this particular farm. In fact, I don't think we found any on any of our farms. The orange dots in this case are in places where there are footpaths or gateways, so a bit of heavy trampling going on there. And these back up our visual and structural assessments. So that's good because it's showing our methods are working well. To date, we've got some results we can compare. As I said, we only had 3 farms start in 2018, but these are the visual scores for 2019 and the structural scores for 2018 or 2019, depending on the farm. The visual scores, the maximum is 35, and you can see that they've all done really well actually. They've all got good scores for that. Structural, again, they've all got really good results. So that means that if you translate that into payments, all 5 of the farms are being paid in the top 2 payment bands. We've got 4 payment bands, with 4 being the highest. A few more results here. These are comparisons of the visual assessments on the farms that started in 2018. And apologies, you can't quite see that 3rd farm, but you can see from the graph that All 3 farms have shown an increase over the 2 years. Obviously, it's only 2 years data, but we're hoping that trend continues as they go through the trial. Farm 2 had a lower baseline score than the others, as you can see. That was mainly due to 1 or 2 of the fields having a bit of a problem with weeds and also a feeder that had caused a bit of damage. But that had been resolved by the time we did the surveys in 2019. And just some next steps for the project. We are inputting into the National Trust's DEFRA test project. I don't know if people are aware, but DEFRA are doing various preparation projects and tests and trials for their new environmental land management scheme, so the ELMS. And the National Trust is one of those organisations that's working on a test project, so looking at a payment for outcomes approach and a whole farm approach. And the soils work that we've been doing has been included in that project. The iCASP project that I mentioned at the beginning, we're looking at a whole range of interventions for natural flood management in that project, and soil management is a key one. It's turned out it's a good intervention because it's, as we can see, there's easy ways to measure it and lots of different approaches to measuring soil health, and it's also a fundamental part of natural flood management. The payment for outcomes soil health option, which is what I've been talking about today, that continues until December 2022, at which point we'll write a formal report. But apart from that formal report, we've also been sharing our findings and experiences widely throughout the trial with farmers, not just ones in the trial, but other farmers as well, practitioners and policymakers. And we're always keen to share the experiences of the trial. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions in the Q&A later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm just having a look at the Q&A. Elizabeth, can you turn back on your camera, please? So there's a question from Lilac Grove. How did the farmers get paid for the different levels of soil health? I wonder if you could just answer that, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. The farmers, we paid on a scale according to whether they got poor or right up to excellent scores, as you saw in the assessments that we did. So the very lowest payment that they could get was £15 per hectare, and that really just covered the farmer's time for filling in the paperwork. And then the maximum score was £55 per hectare. If the scores came out really, really good in the top categories. So I think you saw from our results that all of the farmers were in the top 2 brackets if you averaged out the payments across all the fields that they'd entered into the scheme. So they were all being paid at either £45 or £55 a hectare on average. There were a few variations depending on the individual fields. And it's probably important to point out that these payments were made, it was an entirely National Trust funded scheme. So the money came from the National Trust as part of this trial. And none of these fields were actually in other schemes. So they weren't getting double payments if they were in countryside stewardship, for example. So just to point that out, really, that they're not getting any double payments. So I hope that answers the question.
So there's a follow-up to it. Is that enough to make it worthwhile for the farmer to make changes to their farm practice?
Yeah, I mean, it probably not, and we did get that feedback from farmers, to be fair. But as I said, this was a National Trust funded trial, so we're not trying to say in any way that the National Trust should do be responsible for making agri-environment payments. Obviously, that's a national government responsibility now. So it wasn't they weren't huge payments, but they weren't intended to kind of replace schemes. They were running alongside other schemes in a lot of cases. So yeah, I think that's a fair point, that they weren't huge payments. But we did also have a capital budget so that farmers could access that if they wanted to make land management changes as well. So there were additional options for them.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I can't see any more questions that have come in. So what I'm going to do is ask you if you can just turn your camera off. And we're now going to go to talk about our Horizon 2020 project, Console, with Manolis Tilianakis now.
My name is Manolis. I'm a research fellow at the University of Leeds, and I'm working on this project called Console. And I would like to briefly show you what is it about and some preliminary work we've done on it. So it's part of I'm part of a bigger team in Leeds. Also part of a large consortium of 24 different partner institutions from 13 different European countries. And they have been coming together in order to look at past and current case studies of farmers and land managers that have come together, and they have enrolled and participated in some sort of scheme, agri-environment scheme, but that are looking to enhance the climate, to improve biodiversity, and so on. And the reason why, of course, is that there is a new common agricultural policy coming in the EU in 2021. So there's a review of what the work has for the past few years has actually achieved. And of course, here in the UK, we have the post-Brexit agriculture sort of kicking up and being sort of drafted. There's lots of talk about the new schemes, the elms, and so on. So this work is so what is Console doing? Very briefly, Console has produced fact-sheet summaries you can find in their website of short summaries of what each of these groups of farmers has done in different countries. In total, there are 60 different fact sheets from 60 different groups, and what were the outcomes, what are the expected outcomes of their activities, and of course, is also sort of taking into account more information in terms of in-depth interviews, in-depth examination of why these groups of farmers did what they did, what were the drivers, environmental, social, and so on, and what are the lessons learned from what they've been doing. And then hopefully, the idea is to bring all of this information together from the fact sheets, from the interviews, and from the stakeholder engagement with scientists and so on, and present farmers and land managers across these 13 different countries with some novel agri-environment schemes, some novel contract solutions, as they call them, and see, will this work for you? This has been working in this country, but will that work for you and for your specific needs? And finally, Console wants to create what they call a community practice. So basically, it's just to facilitate the getting together of scientists, of farmers, of foresters, land managers, policymakers, and so on, and try to sort of co-design, to test, and to discuss about these new solutions that are being sort of drafted and thought of. And of course, offer people the ability to find scientific advice or to find expert knowledge and so on. So here in the UK, what we've been working with as the University of Leeds is with a group with different groups of farmers across the Yorkshire area, which is the wider area that iCASP is involved in. So we've been working with Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Funds, the CSSF groups, and in total, these groups, they have around 330 people. So hopefully, this is the impact that we will be able to have. Is the people that we can actually actively inform. So what are the things that are important? Now, what are the questions that we're asking? Is that, okay, there is this policy change that is coming in the EU and the UK, but how are the current agri-environment schemes and the future ones that are being drafted, how well do they fit the needs of farmers and land managers? So the policymakers, they want to enhance the environment, protect biodiversity, and so on. But what do the farmers need? And then there's also, again, the policy shift towards biodiversity, climate protection, and so on. but what are the farmers' preferences on how these contracts should look like? So there's their needs, what they need to do, but also what do they prefer to do? What are they more comfortable? What are they more willing to do? And then finally, all of these contracts, there's so many different agri-environment schemes in Europe. They differ in terms of length of the contract, whether they require monitoring or not, whether they offer scientific support or advice from farm advisors, or, whether you have to collaborate with other farmers and so on. And they're so different. What are the characteristics of these agri-environment schemes that are making farmers more likely to take part in them? So how will the ideal, let's say, contract look like? So what we've done basically is that we looked in the literature and we did what is called a meta-analysis. So we put all of these studies together that were similar. They were measuring the similar things. So they were asking farmers, they were doing surveys with farmers, asking them, here's some contracts, here's some options for you. Which one are you willing to choose? So we did a literature search, and we found basically 37 studies from the past 15 years. And the 15 years is just because agri-environment schemes, the way that we know them now, have been running for the past 15 years. Most of these studies, they were looking into things such as ecologically focused areas or some sort of set-aside land. So basically, it's taking land out of production and leaving it as it is. Most of these studies were in Europe. Most of the studies were studies with farmers, not with foresters. And there was a bit of variety in terms of climate. Most of them actually were coming from countries with continental climate, so cold winters and also warm summers as well. And then we also added some information about the studies from publicly available databases on farmer income and the average farmland size, to see if those things are also playing a role in the acceptance of such schemes. These were the countries, the studies that we collected, this where they were actually undertaken. So basically it's the north and west of Europe. And here's the results. I mean, basically things are not good. So the contracts that the farmers in all these studies were actually offered, they didn't really like it. So the mean estimate is actually negative. The negative doesn't mean much, but basically it means that farmers are not willing to accept such schemes. If we restrict our sample of studies to European studies, because not all of them were European, but the majority were, I mean, farmers are even less willing, European farmers, to take part in such schemes. Well, if we look at studies, though, that what we call the best set studies, like the ones that were better designed, the farmers showed sort of more interest in participating and everything, the estimate is positive in this case, and it's almost 43 euros per hectare per year. I mean, it's not a high estimate, right? So if you compare this estimate to the maximum amount of payments that under EU law you can get for such agri-environment schemes, the 42 euros is it's 100% lower, or sometimes 180% lower from what you get. Usually what you get there is like 200, maximum payment is 200 euros per hectare per year, or up to 900 euros per hectare per year. So 42 euros per hectare, quite a low estimate. Actually, as an estimate, this is closer to what you would get in schemes such as the entry-level stewardship scheme here in the UK. Basically simpler schemes that they give farmers, there are few requirements for farmers, but also the benefits are not as big for the environment. And the other sort of interesting bit of results that we got is that basically from these models, farmers, we could actually see that farmers were willing to participate. But all the variables that we included in the models to explain that interest, they were actually negative. So basically, farmers, they want to participate in biodiversity and climate and enhancing agri-environment schemes. But the way that the schemes are right now across Europe, it's not working for the farmers. They have no interest in taking part in such schemes. So what does that mean then? So And sort of basically this is a little bit more information from the work we've done. So offering the farmers support from scientists or farm advisors, or also offering sort of lengthier contracts were not attractive to them. So one of the reasons could be that farmers do not want to take a lot of land out of production for extended periods of time. And also the interaction between farmers and farm advisors might have but not be considered as a positive for the farmers, because in the past the complexity of the schemes and the demands of the overseeing authorities sort of made the work of the advisors much more difficult. So the farmers actually they saw no benefit to that, and that's not the problem of either the farmers or the advisors. It's just the way the schemes were sort of designed. So basically, our results find this, that the farmers, they won't take part in such schemes. But all the variables that we included, just like the ones that I talked before, they were actually making the farmers less likely to choose that scheme. So the main finding is that the farmers do want to take part, but the current design is not working for them. So they might only take part in agri-environment schemes that are quite simple. But these schemes, actually, they do not provide the change, they do not bring the change that policymakers are actually envisioning. So what are the future steps based on these findings? So clearly we need to design better agri-environment schemes in order to provide the benefits that we're looking for. So we are planning a farmer survey to be rolled out between October and December. They're actually going to incorporate some of the findings that we've had, like, this is not working, but we are going to be looking at especially on how the new ELMs are actually being designed and what they're offering to the farmers, and seeing how the farmers are actually responding to that in order to properly inform UK policy, and then also to get this community of practice going. And to allow farmers to express their views, to find answers to their questions, support from their peers and from scientists, facilitate all this peer-to-peer learning, also within the UK, but also with European counterparts. That is all. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Manolis. So we've got a poll now to follow up on questions relating to that presentation. And I'm just, while that's starting up, I'd just like to encourage you, if you've got any specific questions relating to Manolis's presentation, to pop them into the Q&As.
Perfect. So this poll is asking opinions. Hopefully there's no skips, so hopefully everyone will be able to submit their answers this time. So number one is, in your opinion, what is the most important reason behind farmers not adopting agri-environmental schemes? And the second one is asking your second most important reason. The reasons are not enough support and guidance for farmers, too many requirements or it's difficult to implement, compensation is not enough, lack of security or too frequent changes in policy and targets, and that it's not fit for farmers and farmers are not consulted when schemes are designed. So if you can't see the poll, we've popped this in the Q&A again, and you should be able to comment on the poll with your answers if you're not seeing the pop-up at the moment. Thank you.
Just briefly then, to summarise what the poll results are in case anyone is unable to see it. So for the most important reason people are indicating that is a reason for not adopting agri-environment schemes is that there's too many requirements or it is difficult to implement, and compensation following closely behind that. And then the second most important reason that is being given, oh, again, too many requirements, difficult to implement. So I think I can't actually see any questions coming in into the Q&As relating to that talk on console. So what we'll do is we'll skip forward now then and move on to Kevin Hicks is going to tell us about one of iCASP's newest projects, which is the integrated nitrogen management on Yorkshire Farms project. So
good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Hicks from the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York. And you can see my picture below there. It's a good job it's not moving, because you'd see me sweating in my lockdown attic. And today I'd like to talk to you about a new iCASP project which will run from July 2020 to July 2021. And it's entitled In My Farm, Evidence-Based Good Practice for Integrated Nitrogen Management on Yorkshire Farms. And the proposal was put together by myself and my collaborators, Jean McKendry and Sarah West at SCI in York, who are participatory experts and co-design experts. Sarah Moller at the University of York Department of Chemistry, who is now a senior academic fellow for air quality in the DEFRA Systems Research Programme, led by Ian Boyd, chief scientist, and Pippa Chapman, who's also speaking today at the Confluence at the University of Leeds, chair in biogeochemistry at the School of Geography, and she's our soil nutrient cycling expert, so very much an interdisciplinary team. The In My Farm project is based on an iCASP workshop which was held in York in March 2019. So they involved 40 stakeholders from farming, agricultural policy and scientific research. And it looked at integrated nitrogen management approaches to maximise resource efficiency and farm productivity while protecting the quality of the air, the soil, the water and biodiversity. And the results were synthesised into a DEFRA briefing note, which is available on the iCASP website. The next slide shows you the logos of who was involved in some of the people who were involved in the workshop, and you can see that we spanned from policy, so that we had representatives from the air quality team and the water quality team of DEFRA, and right down to farmers. So we had Angus Galfort from Approach Farm in York, and then everyone in between, all the people trying to link the policy to the farmer. So the key messages from that workshop, which were the basis for the In My Farm project, were communication as a key factor. So among farmers, academics, policymakers, to achieve a shared understanding. And then engagement with farmers by farmers. Engagement with all farmers is critical, including the hard to reach ones. The change happens with peer-to-peer learning. Then the policy issues alignment with the desired goals. So there's a need for flexibility for different contexts and awareness of the implications for farmers working in different areas. And then tools. So the knowledge and tools are out there. It's what our stakeholders told us, but the farmers are time poor and need support. And changes must contribute to financial viability. So that was a theme that came up time and time again. So the new In My Farm iCASP project will very much look at the opportunities that were identified in the workshop. Firstly, surrounding the flexibility in a post-Brexit policy linked to the 25-year environmental plan, the agricultural bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment, the environmental land management scheme, which is related to public money for public goods, and the Clean Air Strategy and the Water Framework Directive. So this is very much, the project In My Farm will very much have a holistic approach. So it's not just about nitrogen, it's about the other factors which are inevitably involved, linked to air quality, nitrate and phosphorus pollution, soil erosion, carbon sequestration, of course, greenhouse gas emissions and the net zero carbon target. Our focus is very much on upskilling farmers in more effective nutrient management, And this is something that was identified in the workshop as lacking at the moment, with only about 50% of farmers actually having a nutrient management plan, and then not all of them actually following that through. So how can we help farmers have more effective nutrient management plans? And very much this is about peer-to-peer learning. So how can farmers learn from each other? We heard at our workshop that farmers often take, the best approach they can. So it ends up being quite ad hoc what type of measures are taken on different farms. So we'd like to learn from farmers across Yorkshire about how they're actually tackling the problems that they're facing. And we'd like to acknowledge the farmers as experts in their own right. And a big message that we got at the workshop was, don't bamboozle us with facts and figures. Use good, solid demonstrations and case studies to show us how things can be done. And very much we'll be facing to younger farmer groups as well. So the project, as I said, will take a holistic approach, and we'll aim to assess the key issues, including the influence of nitrogen management on soil structure and function. And as you'll see in a moment, we'll link very much to other iCASP projects looking at these dimensions. And we'd like to understand the implications of different farmer practices, such as no-till, low-till, use of the cover crops and storage of manure if less applied, etc. These were highlighted in our workshop by our farmer presenters. Access to the potential benefits and trade-offs of farmer actions and what the financial benefits or otherwise may be, and understanding the implications for the new agricultural bill for farmer practice and environmental outcomes. So we've put together a team of partners, and all the ones on this slide we have letters of support from that were part of the proposal. So very importantly, we have the link to DEFRA. So we have the fertiliser team, which is best placed to take the lead, linking to the water and air quality teams. So we've already, with Sarah Moller's help, we've already linked these people within DEFRA. And we've also linked to farmer networks in Yorkshire who attended our workshop. So we have the Yorkshire Agricultural Society with our link person there, Holly Jones, and the Yorkshire Dales Farmer Network represented by Ruth Kendall. We also have the Champions of the Farm's Environment represented by a livestock and arable farmer in his own right, Fraser Hugel, and he's also linked to the Countryside Stewardship Fund, and there's 59 farms in the Estret Valley who are linked to the Countryside Stewardship Fund, and also linked to the iCASP Console project. We have John Williams from ADAS, Jonathan Skidmore from the Catchment Sensitive Farming Initiative from Natural England, and myself, who I'm linked to the International Nitrogen Initiative as a European Director. And I was able to bring someone from Denmark to the workshop who was able to talk about his experiences managing ammonia emissions from the Danish agricultural sector. And the team is sort of finalised by a link to a multi-stakeholder international advisory board which has been put together. So as I was saying, we have many links across the iCASP programme. So we have the link to the soil health initiatives, which are spearheaded by Jonathan Leake and Pippa Chapman. We have the link to Payment for Outcomes initiative, which is the Impact Transfer Fellow Jenny Armstrong, who's also talking today. We have the link, as I said, to Esk Valley Farmers through the Console project, and our link to Champions for the Farm's Environment. And our link there is Duncan Fife. And then recently we've established a very good link to the Met Office on spatial modelling of carbon, nitrogen and erosion in Yorkshire, which has been led by Marcelo Valadares Geldos. And then finally, we have the links to the governance group of iCASP and members such as the Yorkshire Water and the internal drainage boards. So with that background and that team and partners assembled, what do we intend to do between now and next July? So activity 1 will very much be linking to the DEFRA priorities for mixed and arable farms and linking to our partners at DEFRA to identify the opportunities for linking integrated nitrogen management to their policy development and the payment for services that farmers may potentially get under the ELM scheme. Activity 2 then would take this sort of briefing document, which produced by our interaction with DEFRA, and use that with our team of experts to produce a guidance for how we think, using existing knowledge, how the Yorkshire farmers could work to achieve better integrated nitrogen management. Then in activity 3, this outline guidance, or even a potential tool, will be tested with farmers through our farmer networks that we're working with, through structured questionnaire approaches and phone calls, and if permitting, farm visits, of course, if that is possible. And in activity 4, there'll be further consultation and with our wider partner group and our international advisory board, to make sure that we have as many views represented as possible and have reached a realistic consensus. And then the final guidance to Yorkshire farmers for doing integrated nitrogen management will be launched at a multi-stakeholder workshop in the late spring of 2021, where the documents will be fine-tuned, and that the potential for turning it into a tool will be discussed. The project will obviously undergo the impact monitoring and evaluation scheme that iCASP recommends, and here we'll be very much linking to the economic benefit potential linked to the ELM scheme. We'll be linking to the science use in the regional networks connection, for example, uptake of in my farm material by the farmers and stakeholders in the region. Looking at the uptake of our results through the national and regional policies, and obviously capacity building potential and how farmers will have benefited from the information that we've put together. So finally, I'd like to invite you all to think about participating in the project and getting involved in the stakeholder assessment parts of the project. And there's my contact details below. So thank you ever so much for listening, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin, for that. I'm just going to have a quick look in the Q&As while Janet fires up the first poll for this.
Hello, so for this one we've got 2 questions. As we move to more integrated nutrient management practices affecting soil health, what are the key issues for your organisation? And you can select up to 2 responses. So they range from climate change, reduced water pollution, reduced flooding, reduced air pollution, reduced sediment export, reduced biodiversity loss. And the second question is, what is the most important factor for you in determining public money for public good payments? And again, there's a range of answers. Efficient access to payments, good balance between polluter pays and the public money for public goods, the right payments for the right services, payments designed in cooperation with farmers and that you don't know. And the final question is, if your land is mainly arable or improved grassland, how do you manage nutrients? And this is a multiple choice answer, using less fertiliser, manure spreading, slurry injection, and mixed manure in inorganic or inputs. And we've also put this in the Q&A, so if you can't see the poll, you can answer there. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got the poll results up on the screen, and I'm just going to really quickly summarise that for anyone who's unable to see that. So everyone had an option to select 2 key issues for an organisation about as we move to more integrated nutrient management practices. And the 2 that have come out as most important for people are climate change and zero carbon and reduced flooding. And the next question was asking about what is the most important factor for you in determining public money for public goods payments. And the most important one there came as the right payments for the right services, closely followed by a good balance between polluter pays and public money for public goods. So what I'm going to do is just ask Kevin, can you please switch on your camera, Kevin, because we've got a question in from your talk just now. So it's from Mike Potter. How do you directly engage with farmers other than with difficulty?
Very good question. So we've had some success. We did a questionnaire poll before the workshop I told you about, and we got 7 responses from farmers. So it's very difficult to get a lot of response. But the good news is that working through the farmer networks I mentioned, so the Yorkshire Agricultural Society and the Farmer Network in the Dales, you do actually get very good access to their membership, and they are very interested to learn about, you know, what they could possibly be doing to get payments, etc. So we know that we can actually reach them, but it is quite difficult. The other thing to say is that there are champion farmers out there. So the one I mentioned that came to our workshop called Angus Gelthorpe at Approach Farm in York. He's very proactive with regenerative agriculture. He uses cover crops. He's doing soil testing himself, etc. And he was, very pleased to come and talk to us about what he's doing. And across the county of Yorkshire, there are, these are the farmers that we'll be reaching out to, and we're building up our knowledge of who they are. So that's a key thing for us, is to make sure that we acknowledge them as experts, and we include them in the design of what we're doing in this project.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
So can I ask the panel to all turn your cameras on, please? We're coming towards the end, and what I'm going to do is, I don't know if this is going to work, this could go horribly wrong, but I'm going to give attendees an opportunity, rather than putting it in the Q&As, if you've got a question, can you put your hand up? You have a little option at the bottom of your screen. This could go horribly wrong, or everyone could just ignore me and no one puts their hand up. But one of the things I can do is actually enable your microphone. So if anyone has a question to any members of the panel related to anything you've heard here today, pop your hand up. If not, then what I think we will do, and it's looking like it's a not, then Janet, do you want to fire up the next poll for us, please?
Brilliant. Hello, so this one is well, 2 questions. So based on what you've heard here today, do you have any ideas for how we can bring different projects together, or other ways to help us maximise the impact from those projects? And that's a yes or no answer. And then question number 2 is, do you have any new ideas for potential products that you would like us to explore with you? And that's again a yes and no. Thank you.
So as that's coming in, what I'd like to do is suggest that anybody who has got new ideas or ideas for new projects and think, that it might be something that you could do with iCASP, please do get in touch with us. We're always keen to hear your new ideas and discuss things, and just find out more about, what the issues are for you, so that we can better understand what we need to be doing in our work going forward. I think we can probably end that, Janet, can't we? Okay, I don't think I'm going to summarise that. And are you able to just do the very final poll now, Janet, before we hand over to Dave to do a summary? So this poll is something that came up at Confluence last year. A lot of people got in touch afterwards and said, we really would like to, you know, get in touch with other people who've been here. And one thing that we hadn't done was actually ask for permission to share people's contact details. So that's what this is actually doing. We want you to say, yes, I'd like to be put in touch with people. We will only circulate this to other people within this webinar who have also said, yes, I'd be happy for my name, organisation and email address to be shared. If you're not able to get into that poll and indicate anything, please do just drop me a line and I will add you into that list afterwards. But we've got, for example, from the previous webinar, we've now got a group of people who all wanted to get in touch with each other, and we'll do the same for this webinar specifically. We'll just loop you all in together so you can see who else was in here and get in touch with people and find out more. I think based on where we're at on the timings, it's actually now time for me to hand over to Dave Hodgson, who's going to do a quick summary of everything that we've heard here. Dave, can you please do a plug for the virtual cuppa at the end of it? And if anyone in the iCASP team can just pop in the GoToMeeting details into the chat for anyone who can't find that. So yeah, that's it from me now.
Many thanks, Poppy. Well, it's been a really interesting and I think timely workshop this morning on We're Next for Yorkshire Soils, which has really emphasised the diversity of soils in Yorkshire and land uses in the region in general. And I think that's been reflected in the breadth of topics and activity that's been covered by our presenters. As Jonathan highlighted at the start, there's been a near absence of systematic monitoring of soil health and therefore baseline understanding in how to address the sustainability of soils in all regions. Pippa presented some really nice, simple but critical ways to improve soil health and indeed ways of assessing soil health in the field. However, quantification of aspects like loss of organic matter, compaction, erosion is lacking, and as is understanding fluxes of carbon and pollutants in general through catchments over different timescales. And these are areas of real concern, and clearly these challenges are going to be exacerbated in the context of changing climate. The need for higher priority of measurement of soil quality and the development of dynamic soil health maps was really flagged, and that came through really strongly, and we really need to support these management practices. But there are opportunities in the context of a changing political landscape, as Jonathan emphasised, and in the valuation of soils and practices. And this, for example, could be the Environment Land Management Scheme that recognises good soil management and the value of that, and that there is a public goods and benefits that should be rewarded. And this was nicely outlined through Elizabeth and Manolis's presentations that covered some of the new payment for outcome and agri-payment schemes, and indeed the community of practices approaches with a real focus on soil health. And these collaborations and these approaches are really showing exciting evidence of promoting the valuation of soil health within the catchments, which is, I think, a really, really nice and important advance we've seen just within the time frame of iCASP. So there are real and exciting opportunities for these approaches in iCASP, and I think that the real value could be in linking these assessments of soil functions to other aspects of catchment management, such as NFM, wildfire risks, peatland restoration, water quality. And as an example of that integration, we heard from Kevin presenting on the integrated nitrogen management on farms in Yorkshire. One of the newest projects in iCASP, and I think the really nice distinctive element is that co-development element with farmers as experts and peer-to-peer learning, which is quite a novel project in that respect. And this also shows that we remain well positioned to adapt and take on new projects within iCASP, including one of those that Kevin flagged with the Met Office collaboration that's only just starting, in fact. So in summary, understanding how soil-related functions face changing climate, how changing land use practices, understanding erosion and fluxes through this diverse catchment and rolling out learnings to other catchments is really a big challenge, but really an exciting opportunity. And it all feeds into pushing forward on some of the new green growth that has been emphasised in recent weeks within the COVID pandemic. So it's really critical in the near future, and the integrative aspect of iCASP will really help us to enable us position this region globally in the general water sector and indeed soil health sectors, that they're clearly linked. And through that, the recognition for good soil management practices. I'll end by reiterating Joe's opening message to sincerely thank all of our partners for your contributions, both today through questions, but more importantly over the last 3 years. And I really want to emphasise that we are only halfway through the NERC funded part of the programme, and we're in that phase of moving towards a longer term iCASP presence in the region and beyond. So I really strongly encourage you all to contribute and engage over the next 3 years of iCASP, and we have got the chance to develop new projects. So anything from today that you've thought about, where you can see how we may link existing projects or new ideas, we really would value those coming through, such that we can co-design, can co-produce more work within the programme. So I'll just end by thanking Jonathan, Pippa, Elizabeth, Manolis and Kevin for all their presentations today. Really nice set of talks. Must thank all the iCASP team for their help in the background, which this is challenging, clearly, these styles of workshops. Most of all, must thank Poppy for all of her efforts in arranging this unusual, but I hope you think distinctive, Confluence this year. It's really been a huge effort on her part. And yes, just to end by saying we'd really like you to hang around for a cuppa this morning, such that we can continue the discussions. Thank you all. What do you want to do now, Poppy?
So I actually have to stay in because I can't leave this until other people have left. And I've also got to just capture the Q&As and bits and pieces like that. I'm actually just I can stop recording now, actually, can't I?